painters, and welcome to another week of Watercolours with Caroline. We're going to do another Christmas card this week. We're going to do a cute little Christmas kitten, and I'm going to do mine big, and then I scan it and print it and make it into Christmas cards. So you're welcome to do it small or big, whatever you like. It's a beautiful photo by Norine Vidal of her kittens. Her and her husband set up beautiful kitten pictures, and she's given me permission to use this. So thank you, Norine. That's wonderful. So get your paints and your paper and let's get painting. So I have mine all prepared, and if you are doing the greeting, we're going to start by painting the red part, and then we're also going to paint the red sleigh. Get all of the red in there out of the way so we don't splot red on the cat afterwards or anything like that. It also gives us lots of time to work on dry paper. So for the sign up here, I'm just going to use Cadmium Red. And when I come down here, I'm going to mix a little bit of Alizarin Crimson with the Cadmium Red just to get it a little bit deeper in color. If you don't have Alizarin Crimson, you could put a little bit of magenta with the Cadmium Red, or a little bit of rose and cobalt with it, just to get it a little deeper in color. Or if you have a nice deep red, you might have a deeper red that works. Cadmium Red Deep, possibly. I don't have it, but okay, so I'm going to get my number 8 brush and Cadmium Red. Cadmium Red's quite opaque, so it covers really well. It also means it can go a bit streaky if you do 2 layers, so I like to do just one, not too thick, but definitely strong enough layer. And like I said, you could, if you were really good with masking fluid, you could mask the letters off first, but I'm not. After 30 years trying with masking fluid, I am not any good at it, so I'm not even going to try. All right, I've got my red all ready. And I want to, what I noticed yesterday with some people in the live class, watching them use their brush, is they use their brush the same all the time. They just like swish with it. And the idea with the brush is if you want to get a lot of coverage, you're going to use your brush more flat to the paper so you get more of it on the paper. But when you want a lovely, and it'll just come in a bit. If you want a lovely sharp edge, you have to lift the brush up and you have to just use the tip of that brush for sharp edges or pointed areas. So I really urge you to learn different brush strokes for different applications. And I'm going to be a little quiet because I am going to concentrate on getting that nice straight line across the top. Having a pencil line helps you. And because I have some black pen on my letters, I can see them through the semi-opaque cadmium red. I'm just going to go right over the top of them. I find this easier. And it's one reason why I had to use acrylic paint, because if you use even Dr. P.H. Martin's white or any paint over the red, it just picks up the red and goes all pink. Because the red is not particularly staining. It does stain a bit, but it will lift with white paint over the top. So now I'm coming up to the ear here, and I'm using the point of my brush to get in between those little hairs that are sticking out from the ear. Now first I'll make the sticky out points, and then I will connect some of them once I've made some. So areas like that, you slow down and you use the point of the brush, and then you get to a bigger area and you can lay your brush down and use what's called the belly. If you want a straight line, I don't know if you can see very clearly, I'll come in even closer. If you want a straight line, get your brush, the whole brush on your line, and pull it. Don't push as you pull, or you're going to get too much paint come off of it. Just put it there and pull. Now my line's not that straight, so I'm just going to use the tiny tip of the brush Just straighten up a little bit of that. I'm picking up paint on my brush every few brush strokes. And as I come down this side, I need to turn sideways, put my brush down and pull again. That pulling motion, sorry, I've got that out the way here. It's a big canvas, I've got to manipulate it a bit. The pulling motion keeps your brush nice and straight. And then my last little bit is filling up that corner carefully with the point of the brush. And I have to be really, really careful, because at any time if you get your hand in this red or get it anywhere on your paper, it's very difficult to remove. I actually have a little eraser that's made with sand that can, if it's nice and dry, it will actually sort of sandpaper the surface and scrape some of the paper off, but that will help to get a stain off if you got a stain of red. So you can see that the black pen is showing through, and because I kept picking up wet paint all the time, I don't have any lines in my paint. And let me find my scrap paper. The other thing is, if you put your brush down and you push too hard and then lift, you're going to get uneven paint. You'll get lots of paint where you push and less paint where you lift, so your paint will be uneven. So when you pull your brush, you have to kind of just rest it there and pull it with even pressure, so you get an even amount of paint coming off your brush all of the time. And if your brush gets dry, like yesterday I saw people painting like this. They were trying to paint an area like this. Well, what you've got is tons and tons of dry brush strokes that if you try and come back and connect them, this one's really dry, this one's really wet, you're going to get even more streaks if you come back and try and connect them, and bits that you've missed. So that's not how you fill an area. You fill it slowly, carefully, with lots of wet paint and very even pressure. I'll pull back a little bit. And now I want to paint the little carriage that the kitten is sitting in. So this is where I want to, and again, I've got to be very, very careful not to splash my paper with any red paint. I want to take some Cadmium Red, nice, more juicy Cadmium Red, and I'm going to add a little bit of Alizarin Crimson to it, just to darken it up a little bit. Not too much, just want it to be a little bit of deeper red. We are going to put a shadow on after it's dry with a little bit of bluey colour. This is going to just make it a richer red. There, that's pretty good. I'm going to move my tray. Let's put it where you can possibly see it. I think you can, there you go, you can see it there. And I don't, well, I could use this big brush for some of the middle part, but I want to switch to my number 4 brush for some of the smaller detail on the little cart, because I want to get in little areas like this carefully. I'm going to start over here because I will smudge if I start anywhere else on the paper. And you may be asking, well, why aren't we painting the background in first? And there's nothing to say that you couldn't paint the background in first, but there's a big danger that if you wet this background first, you might go over the red area and you might go over the cat, because sometimes it's difficult to see those areas, and you might get the blue and everything in the wrong place. I think doing it last, when everything's in place and you've got the cat, it's going to be much easier to see where to put your background. And what I've done is I've left a dry space between the red and the background so that I've got a clean line between them. So it's just a different way of working. We could have worked on the background first, but then the background would have been all wet and we'd have had to dry it before we could have done the red, and if it was slightly damp the red would bleed. It's just less dangerous this way, less danger of any bleeding or stopping. This way, when we've done the red, we can just leave it to dry and work on the cat. We don't have to wait for the background to dry or anything like that. So as I'm going around the paw, I'll zoom in again so you can see me working around the paw. I'm actually using the point of my number 4 brush to make the fur. Sometimes you can use damp paper to make the fur. That's not going to work with the red. You're just going to get pink bleeding back into the cat if you do that. Very difficult to control the red. It will bleed everywhere, so I'm just going to soften the cat's fur in other places and leave it like this. Now, I still had lots of red on my number 8 brush, and I'm coming to the big part of the carriage now. So now I've got all that fur done, I'm going to take my bigger brush and fill in the larger part that doesn't require so much detail. And I will switch back to my number 4 as soon as I get this bit in, because I want to do some more fur. Now I've got most of that in, so let's switch back to the 4, and using just the point of my brush, I'm going back into the leg, sort of brushing backwards, a little bit like when we did the cardinal to get the feathers, and just making some fur on the edge of that leg. When we are all finished, I will use some Dr. P.H. Martin's white to add a bit more soft fur just there and on the paws. But for now, this will be okay. And you might be able to see how the Alizarin Crimson just makes that a slightly richer colour, richer red. I'm going to do the same on the other side of this leg. Go around the top of the carriage and into those hairs. And you may notice from the photograph that the little carriage is knitted. Well, we're not going to bother with all that knitted pattern. If you love that kind of stuff, you can do that at the end of this if you wanted to, but I thought keep it much simpler than that and just have it fairly flat red and with a few shadows when this is dry. That will do. I'll do all the work. We've used quite a bit of red, haven't we? We've used red for the cardinal. We don't use it all that often this strong. Landscapes don't require it this strong, but it's been nice to do it on the cardinal and this one for Christmas. There. So make sure you dip into your paint often so that you don't get, I'll zoom in one more. You shouldn't be able to see any brush strokes at all. This little thing here is a hair. That little lump you can see there. Let's get that off. Another little hair here. I don't know where the hair is. I'm not going to touch it because it'll make a worse spot. I'll get it off when it's dry. But apart from those two little hairs that are on there, you shouldn't be able to see a brush stroke anywhere if you go on with nice wet paint. And just keep your brush strokes consistent. Red. I'm looking at the photo of the eyes, nice and close up. So the thing with cat's eyes is they're extremely luminous, and of course they're very rounded as well as being wet and luminous. So we need to kind of have that look to them. You can either leave this white highlight out, or you can put it in later with the Dr. P.H. Martin's white. That will work. what we're going to use for this lovely color in the background is some very diluted raw sienna. And then we're going to mix some azo yellow and maybe cobalt blue, and we're going to make a soft green that we're just going to add wet in wet to that raw sienna. We're going to add a little bit more green than you can see in this photo, just to add a little bit more color. And we're going to paint right over the pupil. We'll put that in later. We'll paint over it. And of course, we can't put this dark brown around the edge while all of this is wet. We're going to have to put that in later. So he's going to look a little bit weird and starey until we get this lovely brown around it, and then some darker brown on the top lid. So we're going to work on three things right now. We're going to work on the eyes, and then we're going to mix rose and raw sienna for this little nose, and we're going to come down and do a little mouth. And we'll put a little bit more shadow on those when they're dry. So again, it's going to look a little pale right now. The other place we're going to do a little bit of rose and raw sienna is in these ear areas behind the fur. And again, we can come in with the Dr. P.H. Martin's white and a thin brush after to do some of these lovely wispy hairs in the ears. So I'm going to mix my color with a slightly bigger brush, because if you mix with these tiny brushes, you destroy them. They get all frayed. And I need, first of all, some raw sienna. What I actually need is a little bit of clean space. Just maybe here and here. There we go. So first, some raw sienna. I have some here. If you don't have raw sienna, then yellow ochre is a okay substitute. Yellow ochre is just a little bit more grainy and opaque than the raw sienna. The raw sienna is a little bit more transparent. So I've got the raw sienna for the first layer. Over here I have some rose, so I didn't clean it up all that well. I'm going to use that little bit of rose, the raw sienna, and a little bit of Quinacridone Rose, and I'm going to make the, oh, you can't see it. Can you see it? No, I can't get, pull back, Caroline. I got too close. Okay, there we go. So over here I'm putting a little bit of rose with the raw sienna to make the nose color, sort of a beigey pink color. So I got that color, and now I want a greeny color. This is too strong, so I'm going to get rid of that. That was from last week. And instead of that, I want a little bit of azo yellow. Just for the, and a little bit of cobalt blue. Just to make a very soft green. I'm going to a little bit more blue because it's going to go on the raw sienna color. So those are all soft colors. A lovely point to it, and I can get in small spaces. So I'm going to get my raw sienna and make sure I don't touch any of this red, and go right over, I'm going to go over the whole eye. I'm going to put the white in later with my P.H. Martin's white, because I'll be able to work the wet in wet a little better by doing that. Now you could see that my raw sienna is quite well diluted. It's not strong. It will dry lighter. And even though I want to work wet in wet, I want some control. I don't want it too wet that the green's going to flow all over the place. Oh, I'm going to grab a Kleenex in my other hand, because I'm going to get my brush dry on the Kleenex, and I'm just going to suck a little bit of that raw sienna up and suck it up a little bit with my brush, so there's not quite so much. It doesn't stain very much, so it's one you can wash off. Now, get a little bit of that green on my zero brush, and I'm going to put the green closer to the top of the eye because it will be more shaded with the top lid. Animals and people, their eye is always more shaded by the top lid. Now I've just got a little bit. I'm just going to gently touch that in to the raw sienna so that I get a wet in wet even blend, and take a little bit more around the side. Want to see that raw sienna on the left hand side, and a little bit more green on the top and the right hand side, and it's going to dry much lighter, and you're seeing mine really close up, so imagine it's going to not be so close up and it's going to dry much lighter, and then I'm going to have the white highlight I'll put on last. So I'm going to pull back so you don't see it quite so close. And of course everything else in the painting is very light, so that will make it seem lighter than it is. If you get too much paint on there, then just use a thirsty brush, a clean thirsty brush, and lift a little bit up. That's going to be easier than controlling it from the start. And that's the eyes done for that layer. We still have the dark pupil layer and the outlining, but that's good for that one. The little nose, still with my zero brush, tiny little pink nose with the raw sienna and Quinacridone Rose. Just a little wee nose. And I'm going to come down and just out slightly, and you see a tiny bit of the pink lower lip just in the middle there. That's all you really see. We will put in darker nostrils when this is dry. Everything on this requires quite a delicate touch. But I'm going to add the tiniest touch of Cobalt Blue to make this pink. Oops, that's not a tiny touch. That's rather a lot of Cobalt Blue. Let's mix it in a bit. And add a little bit more raw sienna. And I'm doing a very bad thing. I should be mixing with a different size brush. Let's get a different size brush. If you put I put too much blue in, just get a bit more of the other colors, which was a bit of raw sienna, a little bit of rose. And what we're making is a kind of a grayed down pink. So the blue, the little bit of blue, just grays it down a little bit. I got too much on my brush there. It really does require just a tiny bit. There. The blue, especially Cobalt Blue, is great for making things just a little bit more gray with very soft tones. So I'm adding a little bit more water. That's perfect. And that's going to be for the insides of the ears. So I'm going to use my number 2 brush now, slightly bigger brush. And I'm going to go over here, just inside this ear. And now I've got my wet brush. And I don't want it too strong, that line. I'm going to put a wet brush over it. I want it softer. That wet brush just softens it up a little bit. I'm going to have a little bit of shadow in here. Remember, if you lose any of your white fur, you can put it back in when you're finished. At the base of the ear here, it's quite fairly dark. soft wet brush, just to, everything about this kitten is soft apart from the claws. And we just want to show that with using your wet brush to soften all your paint lines. And then this ear here, just inside there. I'm not going to wet that one because it's so small and it might go into the red. Don't want it going over into the red. And just inside that ear there. So it's really, really subtle. It's just a little tiny bit of color. And go back to my zero brush. And my lower lip is already dry, so I'm going to put a little bit of that grey on the lower lip and the base of the nose there. It's a tiny, tiny bit. There, I'll let you catch up with that. The eyes and the nose and the ears. And Caroline is absolutely right. Inside the little basket here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do that now. Yeah, good. Thank you for pointing that out.
Before we go too farther.
Yeah. Yeah, that goes in here. And same thing, maybe. Yeah, thank you. That's a very good point. Before you get rid of your red paint or your red water, clean my brush. So I'm going to make what I'm going to do right now, I think the red's fairly dry. I'm going to protect this paper while I mix up some color. And I want to get more raw sienna. Just by itself, so we have some light fur color, which is the raw sienna. I even have a Daniel Smith raw sienna light, which is a lovely, lovely golden color. A little bit lighter than regular raw sienna, and it's made with one of the yellow pigments, which makes it even more transparent. I like that one. And then in the second well, I'm going to mix the raw sienna with burnt sienna, so we have a slightly darker. There's my burnt sienna. Have a slightly darker raw sienna. Because they're both sienna. Burnt just means that they've fired the clay, the sienna clay, so that it's darker. And then the third one is going to be the darker brown. And I said that I've used raw sienna, cobalt blue and rose. So that was the nose color that I just cleaned up. I could have left it there. So it was the same color I just made, but darker. So the raw sienna, the Quinacridone Rose, and then the cobalt blue. This time I can go a little heavier on the blue to get it a little bit more brown. A bit more raw sienna. Now when this color is for the fur that is in here, this sort of darker fur just in here and just under this paw. So there's not a lot of it, and it's a very pinky warm. If you see, I'm just painting my color I just made next to it, and it's that pinky warm brown color. So that's why I use the rose and the raw sienna, and then a little bit of cobalt blue to gray all that down and make it brown. What I want to have as well is just some burnt sienna on its own if I want some stronger accents. So when you're looking at the top of the head here, where we're going to wet it to make it soft, you might want to put a little bit of burnt sienna in there on top of your other color, just to make it a little bit more brown. So I'm going to have a little bit ready. because they fade so much when the colors are wet and they go onto wet paper, they really fade away. So you might not have enough definition. So I'm going to get a little bit of burnt sienna just ready. So I've got all those cat colors ready to go. I'm going to work on dry paper, but with a wet brush to soften all these furry lines in. So let's get him nice and close so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to start with the middle of the head here, putting those, I'm going to use little short brush strokes to put these hairs in, and as I go I'm going to add water to soften them and get those in. So that's our plan. And again, I'm going to use a small brush. I'm going to have my number 4 to soften, to wet, and my number 2 and number 0 for the fur. I'll start with my 0, and I'm going to use the medium color, so that was the middle one. Ooh, it's close up. It's the burnt sienna and raw sienna. It looks very orange under the light here. It's not quite that orange, it's a little bit more brown. And let's get a paper towel. What I'm going to do is put the paper towel here so I can lean my hand on it, so I don't lean any paint on here. And then let's just start stroking upwards with the brush. Remember the bird we stroked in line with the feathers? Well, we're going to stroke in line with the fur on the cat. I'm coming upwards as the fur comes up over its head. And then I'm going to take my number 4 brush, wet it, use my cloth to get a little bit of that water off. Whoops, I dropped my brush. And then before that paint dries too much, I'm going to use that damp brush, slightly damp brush, to soften those lines in. I'm not using much water on my brush. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet a bit of the area where I'm going to put the next strokes, just very gently. And go back to my 0, put my number 2 out of the way for a minute. Too many brushes on the go. And then continue. Now because I've wet the top of the head a little bit, these ones are going to be less distinct. Little short brush strokes. And they're going into slightly wet paper. Now I'm going to take the raw sienna and work into those strokes with a little bit of raw sienna and a little bit of water. So I started with just the raw sienna, then a little bit of water. Now the back of the ear is a little darker, so I'm going into that dark mix. I made it with the raw sienna and the rose and the cobalt blue. And just behind the ear here, it's a little bit darker, so I'm putting that in. And maybe around the edge of the ear, just here. And there's some hair coming up on the top of the head. I'm just going to put that in with a little bit of the darker brown. And I just have my 0 brush here, so I'm also adding a little bit of shading to that damp raw sienna I put in there. So it's slow, 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 this process, very controlled, which you should like. Now a little bit of just the raw sienna on my brush now. I'm going to add some to the parts of that ear there. It's coming together slowly, very slowly. When I pick up my raw sienna, I'm actually watering it down as I pick it up. I'm getting a bit of water on my brush, watering it down a little bit. And then I'm going to complete the head with some watered down raw sienna. And as we come up the back of the other ear, I'm going to get some of that darker brown and just take that up the back of the ear. And again, I have that darker brown on my brush still. I'm going to come down and do a little bit more definition to those stripy bits. Doesn't matter if the paint's wet. One time you can definitely work on wet paint. We just want it all to blend. So I'm going back to my number 4 brush. I'm getting a little bit of raw sienna. And I'm going to come up the middle of the nose now with that raw sienna. Bigger brush so I can get a bit of a bigger brush stroke. I'm not going right down to the pink. I'm stopping, I guess if you're measuring in centimeters, half a centimeter maybe away on my size. And I'm bringing up those kind of eyebrow shapes. Then I'm going to get the medium brown, not too dark. And there's a dark line coming down from the corner of the eye here along the edge of the nose. And on this side, comes down here. And sort of joins the nose in like a little sort of a triangle here. Now those are all quite hard lines, so again I've got to get my wet brush that's not too wet, and I'm going to just soften those lines a little bit. The brush that's not too wet. We can, when this is dry, come in and put a little bit of darker paint if you need to. There's sort of a dark triangle at the edge of the eye. I'm using the darker brown for this. We're not going to do the eyeliner yet, not ready for that. And put in some of these shadows. And I feel that these little lines coming up here, it's still wet paint, so I can still bring up a little bit of dark brown coming up here into the wet paint. Give it a little bit more definition. Wet brush, again, to soften that up. So what we're doing is we're gently getting in those very soft shadows. The next one we need to work on is under the eye here, this one, and under the eye here. If you can see that they're little sort of triangles under the eye, which give the eye a lovely definition. We're going to keep all of this sort of cheek area white, and then soften all these other areas. Even under the chin here is not quite as white as the cheeks. We're going to have a little bit of shadow under here. So the next thing I want to work on is these little triangles under the eyes. Get my little tiny brush. And I'm going to use the darker brown watered down. I'm adding to the edge of it a little bit of water, because these are quite dark shadows under the eye here, and they'll make them stand out. So I'm going to paint that actual little triangle shape, which I've drawn in under the eye. There. Wet brush, and soften it in with some wet brush strokes. It's less soft, sort of less soft under here, and my little wet brush strokes are going to blend it into a piece of pencil shaving. Blend it out. Same with the other side. I'm going to take that diluted darker brown under the eye first. There's even like a little bit of a eyeliner coming down there. Medium brown for that. Bring it down a little bit more. A wet brush. I've got my dark brown on, wet brush, and let's take that out with short little strokes. Take it out into the edge here. And if you find that you've diluted it too much as you come out, it'll still be wet, so you can go back in and touch in a little bit of dark color closer to the corner of that triangle shape. And you'll notice all the time as the colors are drying, they will be lightening quite a bit as they dry. I'm going to go to my number 4 brush and get a little bit of just raw sienna. And we're going to bring some very soft color to this fur just here, just with the diluted raw sienna. A bigger brush so that you get more paint and less little brush strokes. And just shadowing that fur coming out there. Same on the other side. Number 4 brush, diluted raw sienna. Because it's not all white, and we don't want it all the same color raw sienna either. We want to have some variety of color in there. I'm going to start with some raw sienna shadows coming out. And we have to make these little puffy cheeks stand out, and we'll do that by putting shadow behind them. So I'm taking the middle brown, get this under the camera, so this middle brown, which has got the burnt sienna, I'm going to add a little bit of the darker brown to it on the corner here. So I've got a combination of the darker brown and the middle brown with a bit of the burnt sienna in it. I got paint on my hands. Hang on, when I just get the paint off my hands. And still with my number 4 brush for a moment, I'm going to define those little cheeks with a little bit of darker brown here. And again, wet brush. I've put a little bit of paint on, wet brush. I'm going to pull that paint out and soften that paint up with the wet brush. There will be a little bit more shading later. We want to get the main shading on first and then work on a little bit of modeling with the shading. Going back to the raw sienna to have a little bit of shadow under here. And same the other side. To make sure I get that round, little round puffy cheek. And there's going to be a little bit under his chin too. But I don't want it too dark all the way along. I'm going to use a wet brush to soften that and pull that out a little bit. And I do need a little bit more shading on top of his eye. Just raw sienna, taking a little bit of shading up there. And so we're starting to build and model the face. Now you can either work on this wet in wet to get a little bit more shading. I'm taking a little bit of the darker brown, or you can just wait till this is dry and come in with a little bit more modeling and shading. Sometimes it's easier once it's dry to put a little bit more in. There's a little bit of darker fur just behind this puffy bit of fur here. I'm going to pop that in. And just in here, there's a little bit of shading in here. Wet brush to get that in. And then this area is, I'm just looking, and this is too flat. These little areas need to be more rounded, so I need to just come around here with some just raw sienna and a wet brush, and I want that more rounded here. Just too flat. Under the chin is slightly, just slightly darker, so it has to be extremely subtle. I'm going to take a little bit of the dark and the raw sienna, just a tiny bit, and put that near the mouth first, then get a wet brush and lighten that up with a wet brush, just bringing it down. So there's just the tiniest bit of shading on that lower jaw. I'm going to pull back a little bit as we're going to work down the cat a little bit. We will have to put in some darker shadow under the chin. I want to wait till the chin's dry and just work on some of the edges of the paws first. So it's all sort of about putting on the raw sienna and then a little bit of the darker brown, so they mix wet in wet. So you get that sort of soft edge look. If you can see that it's kind of darker around the soft edge, and then coming into just slightly lighter creamy color. It's really subtle. We have to be a little less subtle in our painting. I've been a little less subtle with that. I've put a more color just so that it shows up a little bit more in our painting. That doesn't matter. We don't have to be quite as light as the photograph. The cat may have been darker than that, and the exposure just lightened a little. And I think we just need a little bit more color in our cat to make him stand out. So we're working the same way and putting on, using the raw sienna for the sort of the light shading coming out from under here. There's sort of a clump, sort of another triangle clump of fur, sort of here. I'm putting in the bold shape first, and then I will soften it with some water so you can see the shape that I'm working on. And I'll soften that off with a wet brush. And also coming down this pore here, we want to have some like soft shading. Wet brush just to soften that it all in, leaving a little bit of white showing. Oops, I dropped a great big blob of water on my paper, which is why I have the paper towel here. And while that is slightly damp, I'm going into the darker brown mix and putting an edge to those pieces of fur, long pieces of fur, with the darker brown. The other reason I'm making it a little bit darker is so that we can actually see the fur sticking out. And we don't have to do so much work with our background or with the white or anything. We're creating the illusion of fur with more positive shapes. I've got the dark brown. All of these colours will wash off, so if you get too much paint on, you can take a damp brush and you can wash back really easily. And on the left side of the paw here, there's a little bit more shadow. Just here, there's a little bit of shadow. Soft little strokes. And a wet brush again to just soften them in a little bit. And here, his chest hair is shaded behind the paw. So I'm going into the medium brown, the one with the raw sienna and the burnt sienna, which is a little bit stronger than the colour in the photo. And getting that shadow behind the paw there. And putting the shadow in. Might take a little bit of the darker brown just here. Just drop it there. Put the shadow in and then pull your brush backwards using the point to get those chest hairs. A little bit of just raw sienna now. I'm taking it up a little bit more dark. It goes a little bit dark up to kind of here. And I'm just working with the raw sienna at the moment. And a little bit of water. And take a little bit of water and just soften all of that. And then take a little bit of the darker brown and have a little bit of darker brown shadow coming across here. It's kind of almost like a rectangular shape coming across here, but slightly darker. And then we're going to get into quite dark over on the right hand side. Wet brush, soften that up. Wiggle, 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 wiggle strokes. There's some little shadows in here. And coming down here. So we're kind of building the chest right. All right, we're going to go under the chin in a moment. And right here, there's some kind of squiggles in the fur. We've done this bit down here. We're going to put these little squiggles in just here. And then once they're in, take a wet brush and again soften all the edges of those squiggles. So that they're not quite so deeply coloured. Now, once I've softened, I quite often go back and drop in a little bit of dark. It'll just flow into the water that I've put on there and darken that patch just a little bit. And then I have to come under the chin, should be dry now. So I'm going to come under the chin with the hair that's under there. And the key is to look at some of the main shapes that you see. Oh, let's get, I'm going to get some dark brown on my brush. Put that down. So with my dark brown, this is a shape I see here, like a curly shape there. There's a shape here. There's a swirly shape here. And those are sort of the shapes you make first, and then you soften them in with a wet brush. There's kind of quite a big shape there. And it's all shaded under the chin. That makes the chin stand out. So of course I'm not going to use dark brown on the cat. That was just so you could see how I'm forming the shapes. I'm using the sort of medium brown and making those shapes that I can see, and a little bit of the soft shadow here. And then before they dry and get too distinct, again, wet brush, and also maybe a little bit of the raw sienna. To just soften those shapes in, but we need to get that chin showing with the dark shapes underneath. And I want to put a little bit more in up here now this is dry. I'm going to add a little bit more colour. And this one shape here, it's a little bit darker coming down. And then there's you can see the fur coming out across here. So I'm going to make that with the darker brown. And I may need a little bit more darkness under the chin when this is dried. I can make that decision later and just get those darker shadows in. I definitely want a little bit darker here. And I'm going to pull back a little bit. And it's going to be fairly dark on the back here. Now I know we're going kind of detailed and slow for this little tiny, like basically white kitten, but it's our focal point. It's the main part of the painting, and we have very flat red. Everything else is going to be pretty flat. So we need to really pick this up with this little bit of detail, otherwise he's going to look too flat and uninteresting. And it is just a good chance to use your brush in a different way. Very small strokes and softening everything in with the wet brush and getting a very different look to what we may have worked on last week. So when I go into the dark fur back here, this is going to be fairly just plain painting. I'm going to use the darker mix, the blue, the pink and the raw sienna, to just go in here and put this in fairly quickly, but I've also got the fur sticking up on the back there. And I might switch to, I'm trying to think, number 2 brush. No, I might start with my number 4 brush and get my darker paint. I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it and a little bit more burnt sienna to it, just to make it slightly darker than any of the paint we've been using, because it is fairly dark in that area. So I had that dark brown and I added a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of cobalt blue, just to darken it up a little bit. And then I'm going to take that in this area. Now I am going to switch to my number 2 brush because I want to get a lot of fur showing. I need to be doing small furry strokes here. A little bit more water on my brush. So I started kind of small with this as I found my way between all the clumps of fur, and then kind of working my way down. I'm going to add a little bit more water to the color so it's not quite so dark as I come in here, even though it's down here in a sort of a crease in the body of the cat. It isn't as dark as the fur in the background. Now I'm switching to the raw sienna mixed with the burnt sienna for the top of his back leg here. And then switching to the just raw sienna. And then number 4 brush, just wet. I've left a lot of white, but I have to get that wet brush in there before that other color dries so that I can really soften all of that color down, make it really, really soft. And as this leg comes down towards the basket, again, it's darker here. So now I've got that medium and light brown on into that wet paint. I'm going to add the dark brown. And even just here. It's a bit darker. And then coming up into got the darker brown now. I'll zoom in again. So the fur under here, as it comes down over the top of the basket, is fairly dark, with lighter hair coming over the top of it. You can get that dark in there. While this is still wet up here, I'm going to add even more, just drop in even more dark up there. It's fairly dark. A little bit there. Right, and then I need to dilute my dark, which means just add a bit of water to it. And this side of the leg has some darker shadows, but then they're definitely not as dark as some of these other shadows. So that's why I want to add a bit of water to the paint, so it's not as dark as this and slightly less dark than this, although this is fairly dark in here. So again, I'm just going to drop in a little bit more dark just there. There is a few little shadows in the front leg. Incredibly subtle little shadows. So I'm just going to get raw sienna. There's a little shadow just here. I'm using wiggly strokes. Tip of my brush, wiggly strokes. They look awful until you get your damp brush with a tiny bit of water on and you start pulling those little strokes around with a wet brush, just to make those sort of little shadows in the fur. This one just here is fairly dark. And I'm going to get a little bit of raw sienna on my brush and water, and let's give a bit more color around there. A bit more just raw sienna. All blending into that little dark crease, which now I've put all that water in, might need just a little bit more paint. This little leg has a bit more of a crease in too, just a tiny bit more. I'm going to pull back just once so you can see more of the whole sort of cat. And the nice thing is, working at this pace, your eyes should be perfectly dry by now. You don't need to worry about drying them with the hairdryer, but if they don't feel dry, you can do a little bit of drying with the hairdryer. But they'll be ready for you to go back and do some definition. What I'm going back to do some definition on is these little stripes on the top of the head. I want to go back and put a little bit more color on those with the dark brown and little strokes. Because now that first layer is dry, I just feel like it needs a bit more color. It's an important feature And even over here, a little bit more color. And the eyes look better if there's some triangle of color pointing in to the eye, like I'm just doing there. And again, after I've done those little strokes, I can use a wet brush to soften some of them in. You don't want your brush too wet, or the strokes they'll just disappear. You won't see them. Just slightly wet. And again, under the chin, can use a little bit more definition, a bit more dark, now that that's dried up a little bit. One lovely little feature that the cats have is those little dimples where their little whiskers come out of their top cheeks. And I've got my little zero brush in the dark brown. I'm just going to, my brush is not wet enough, got to get a little bit more water on it. I'm running out of dark brown. I might have to just use some sepia. See. And I am going to get some just dark brown sepia on my little tiny brush and put the nostrils in. Just a little bit of dark just there and there. Actually, it helps. I'm going to mix a little bit of cobalt with my sepia because sometimes it's not dark enough. Little nostril there and there. Let me just think. Yeah, and maybe take it up just around the edge of the nose. Looking a bit lopsided. A little crease down the middle of the nose. And then I'm going to do the first layer of the what I call the eyeshadow. I have the sepia on top of the burnt sienna and a little bit of blue with it. So I'm going to add a little bit more burnt sienna. I had some cobalt blue mixed with that because I don't want the first layer of the eyes to be too dark. I'm going to come back with a second layer that's a little bit darker. But the first layer I'm going to do with this sort of dark burnt sienna colour, very tiny brush, and start with the top, the eye. And there's actually, in the corner of the eyes, quite a bit of dark. And this corner too. But as you come around, not quite as much. And same with the other eye. Go around. I'm going to put my paper towel here. I'm forever smudging. And then quite a bit darker in the corner here. If you actually look at the photo, it's quite a sharp, definite line around the eye. My brush went a bit wonky there. Because my brush went a bit wonky, I'm going to get a clean brush and try and get a little bit of that out. Didn't want that little bit there. And the other thing is, on the top of the eyeball, there's always a shadow from the top eyelid. And I'm diluting that brown down and very carefully, that diluted brown, just putting in a shadow over the top of that eyeball. And suck a little bit up from the corner there. And that probably is an area that I would like to dry now with the hairdryer so I can finish the eyes. The eyes are the absolute focal point of this, so I want to get those in so I can judge a lot of the other colours that I finish up with. So I'm going to just use my hairdryer and make sure they're very dry to get the rest of the eye done. And then we can work on I think I did the background before I did the rest of the sleigh. Yes, I did. And then I can show you how I did the letters if you want to do them that way or not. It's totally up to you. Let's turn my microphone off a minute. This paw sticking out the back here, I forgot about that one, so I can do that right now before I do the pupils in the eye. There's not much to do to it, just a little bit of dark brown shadow behind this paw. So I'll put the shadow in and then soften. Oh, I got that in. Clean brush, slightly damp, and lighten and soften that shadow in, taking a little bit of raw sienna just for the top of the paw. What I'm doing is I'm taking colors I see in the photo and I'm just accentuating them just a little bit so they're just a little bit more raw sienna or just a little bit more brown. And close to the edge of this paw, it's quite dark, so I'm dropping in just a little bit more dark brown here. I'm just grabbing some sepia because I'm running out of my nice dark brown mix and just wanted a little bit. And there's a little bit of fur sticking out here. A little bit of fur sticking out the bottom of the little paw pads there. And that fur sticking up here. Oh, there. It's got that little back paw and leg in that I forgot all about. Poor little kitty. And then once we got that in, back to the eyes. Let's zoom in on the eyes again. And I'm going to check my notes to see what dark color I use for the eyes. It doesn't really matter if you use black, they're so tiny. You can use, or burnt sienna mixed with ultramarine blue would be good. What did I use? Let's see. I've used some Payne's grey and the dark brown mix. Or anything dark, they're so tiny, it doesn't really matter what you use as long as you've got a nice dark mix. I have that. I have some Cobalt Blue, I have some Sepia, so let's use a bit more Sepia, a bit more Cobalt. See, it goes dark quite quickly. Sepia and Cobalt, and then I'll get a little bit of Payne's grey, or you can just use black. Honestly, it doesn't matter. There, that's nice. That's nice and dark. Dark, certainly dark enough for what we're doing. And again, my zero brush. And oh, I want my piece of, I'm so bad at getting paint everywhere. I've got to get my paper towel. And then we're going to make those little lemon shaped pupils. These ones are quite wide. And one here. And like I said, I will put the white in when this is dry. Little white reflections. In the photo, the oops, I blobbed that too much now. I haven't got a point at the bottom. In the photo, the point at the bottom of the pupil does not come down to the bottom of the eye. I just lifted that up. I didn't get a very nice point at the bottom there. And also to show the curve of the eye, you kind of have to do your pupils kind of with a bit of a curved stroke as well, not a straight up and down stroke. That shows the curve of the eye. And then once you have those in, you can add a bit more eyeliner here, because it is quite dark above the eye. It really makes them stand out nicely. Just above the eye. Yeah, and I've got to take another good look at my cat to see how much I need to do now. I think for the cat, I can say the cat is pretty much done. I want to do the background. But now the background colour is going to be Cerulean Blue, partly because the background colour in the photograph is Cerulean Blue, and partly because Cerulean Blue works so well with the colours, the sort of orangey, yellowy colours in the cat. Just really sets the cat off, those colours, and works well with the red too. All of this is about the colours playing off each other. And when we do the background, try to leave a really ragged edge around the background. We want to be very quick and is that a word? Imprecise? We don't want straight edges. We don't want clean edges. We want some really just swooshy background, really quick, and then the salt in it. So, but I don't want to rush you into that if you're not ready yet. This looks like it's got nothing too important in it. I'll get some cerulean in there. Again, what have I done? I've done that over my painting without putting my protective thing there, because oh, look at all, I see I've got water on it already just from not protecting it. Already got it wet. So I want some cerulean in here, not too strong, but we want quite a bit because we've got quite a lot of, well, I've got quite a lot of surface to cover, and I want to make sure I've got enough to cover it all. I'm going to use my number 10 brush when I do it so that I don't fiddle and fuss. Put that down. I'm so glad I put this here because I got a big blob there and I got water on everything. So my number 10 brush and my clean water. And first of all, I want to be precise as I go under this Merry Christmas sign. I don't want to touch it with my water, but then I'm just going to like scribble with my brush. Not right up to my cat. I'm just going to sort of scribble with the brush. I am going to go right over the bottom of the carriage here. And the same thing up here. I want to get just about 2 millimeters away from that red and then just scribble with the brush. I don't have to go too close to the cat. And then just under the carriage here. And scribble with the brush. So I've got the water on. Get my cerulean blue on my brush and see, is it diluted enough? I don't want much blue. I just want, again, as I go up to that sign and up to the cat. Now, as I come up to the cat, I want to be careful. I didn't have to be careful with the water because I didn't come right up to the cat, but I want to be a little bit careful with the cerulean blue. So along the edge of him here, and then I'm just going to scribble with the brush. A little bit careful here, scribble, scribble. And this side, a little bit more water with my blue. It can be diluted in some places and less diluted in others. Very careful up the side of that sign, scribble, scribble, scribble. And at the top of the cat here, I want to get that furry look, so I'm going to come down, get that furry look into the cat. Oh, I could bring it a little closer so you can see that. And then under here, not quite so blue, I splashed onto the thing there, don't do that. And what I want to be careful of is not leaving it too long before I get the salt in. So scribble, scribble, scribble the edges. And I'm seeing it drying a little bit. So even before I finish, I'm going to get a little bit of salt in. And I don't want it to dry too much. And what I do want to do is I'm going to have to turn it. I'm sorry. Well, I don't need to apologize. That's what you do. You have to turn it to get your brush into these furry bits, in and out like this, in and out, scribble, scribble, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. Careful over the edge of the carriage. And there you go. So you're not putting, you're not taking your time really, you're being careful. In some areas, you're kind of careful around the edge of the cat, kind of a little bit careful around the edge of the carriage. Doesn't need to be a very strong blue. You can go right over the, what I don't know what these things called, like the sledge part, the bottom part, and go right over that with your paint, because that's going to be dark. I'm going to add a little bit more paint under here. And as long as you're like 1/2 millimeter away from the red, it'll be fine. It won't bleed out. Here I was a little bit further away. I didn't want to go over the red too much. And then you put the salt on just as the blue is starting to lose its shine and just starting to dry. So you have to keep an eye on that. A little bit here. A little bit here. And that's enough. You don't want too much salt on there. And of course then you just have to let the salt do its thing. Now the good thing is I can leave that salt to do its thing, and I can work on this little Merry Christmas because it's all dry there. I left that completely dry. What I'm doing is just I'm brushing the salt off of it. Now, you probably don't want to follow along while I do this Merry Christmas. It's time consuming. I'm just going to do a little bit of it just to show you what I'm going to do. But I have two pots of acrylic here. I have some white and I have some gold. Now you could just do white letters, or you could stick on one of those things that I sent you. You know, you could stick this right on there, no problem. You could stick any type of sticker on there. But if you did want to paint it on, then acrylic is going to be your friend. So I have some flat white acrylic first. Now I tried putting the gold over the red, it just didn't show up because it didn't have a background color to make it glow. So I had to do the white first if I wanted it gold. And the black pen helps me and helps the words show up. I'm going to get a little tiny, I'm going to get a stiffer brush, not my watercolor brushes. And I would never, ever use my watercolor brushes with acrylic paint anyway. I wouldn't dream of it. And then I'm going to just carefully, with a small, firm brush, just fill in those letters with paint. This is a 3/0, very tiny brush. And it's painstaking. You really have to take your time if you want to do it carefully. And when the white is dry, and the good thing is acrylic dries pretty quickly. Once the white's dry, if you want gold, you can go in with the gold over the top, and then the gold will show up better than if you just put it on the red. It doesn't really show up just on the red. Or you just might want white, I don't know. Also, one layer is a little bit scratchy. You might want to go in with either a second layer of white or the gold. It doesn't always give you a nice smooth coverage with just one layer. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm not going to belabor the point, just maybe finish the M. And I just could not think of another way of doing this other than just stick a sticker on the top, because to paint around all these letters with red paint would be virtually impossible. I don't even know how one would do that unless you were incredibly skilled with a paintbrush. I mean, this is a
You could
3/0.
use the fine tech too, Caroline, couldn't you? The
Yes,
fine tech.
you could use the fine tech paint. Yes, that's a watercolor paint. The only thing is, with any watercolor paint, even the PH Martin's white, it lifts the red. The water lifts the red, so you end
Oh,
up getting pink, which is why I'm using the acrylic, because it doesn't lift the red as you paint. I think I tried. I've got some PH Martin's white here. I'm just going
but
to.
what if you use the gold fine tech,
Well,
the metallic?
why don't I try it? I can try it. There's no harm in trying. I'm going to reconstitute my PH Martin's white because I need that for the whiskers and stuff.
Right.
And of course it's gone pretty hard. So
Caroline, I completely cheated and I did the Merry Christmas in black permanent marker and then just painted red over top.
that is perfectly fine. So this
It's
is
not as sweet though, because black's kind of ominous looking.
well, this doesn't matter what you do, whatever works. And like I said, that's why I sent you a a bunch of stickers. Now today the PH Martin's White is not lifting it as badly as it did the other day. And then Caroline suggested the Fine Tech paint, so I'm going to get my Fine Tech paint, and I'm going to see what that looks like too.
It'd be pretty with the gold, I think.
Yeah, let's see what it looks like. So there's just dozens of options, like whatever you feel like doing. I know the first time I tried it, the red lifted, but maybe today it was drier, or maybe I used the Pyrrole red last time and the straightforward Cadmium Red was better. I don't know. Anyway, what I'm getting right now is I'm getting some of my gold Fine Tech just to see what that would look like. I'm going to do it on the C here. And because this is watercolor paint, I can go over the top of it. That's fine. I could do 2 coats if it doesn't cover very well.
That's nice.
Yeah, it is quite nice, yeah. So if you have Fine Tech and that's what you'd like to do, I mean, Caroline's is a expert with the brush calligraphy, so she could do all kinds of things.
But you can see that I've chosen not to do any lettering.
Well, I think whenever I do make a card that I have to do special lettering on, I tend to do the lettering on a separate piece of watercolor paper and glue it on, just in case it doesn't.
Yeah.
Especially the one that I sent to Betty, the thank you card. I did the lettering on a separate piece of watercolor paper, and then when I was happy with it, I glued it on, because you don't want to mess up your.
You get 3-dimensional that way.
You do, and it looked okay. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you could definitely do 2 coats of gold Fine Tech. Mine's getting a little bit scruffy looking. The other thing I did when it was all dry, I used some diluted Ultramarine Blue, just getting a little bit. The reason I stop talking sometimes is because I reach over to get my paint, and then I had very diluted Ultramarine Blue in my small brush, and what I did when it was dry, got to dilute that even more.
Oh, nice.
I just did a little shadow with the diluted ultramarine, just to lift the letters up a little bit from the red. You don't need much blue. And ultramarine blue works the best. Not too thick, like you need to sort of see the red through it. And the other thing I did too, when it was nice and dry, was I did the black line again after it was dry, so that kind of outlined it a bit more. But all of those little tricks help if you want to do them. And the final little thing that I did was, of course, oh, I got way too many brushes on the go here. I put the little white highlights in the eyes, which really make the cat look alive.
Oh, wow.
And then I got my very thin liner brush, and I gave the cat some whiskers. So I have my 2/0 script liner, and I have a silver black velvet script liner, but I actually prefer these stronger Princeton ones. They have a little bit more snap to them, so you can get a firmer line. And I found that although I absolutely adore the silver black velvet brushes, they were just a little bit floppy for getting the really lovely thin lines that you need for whiskers and stuff. So I have the Dr. P.H. Martin's white on there, and then just like drag your whiskers out quickly with the white, and that, and the other places, of course, these soft hairs. Let's just come in a little closer. I'm sort of rushing now. My blue's not dry, but my cat is definitely dry. And of course I would turn my paper again so that I can get my whiskers going in the right direction. I'm being a bit lazy now, but and they have sort of whiskers up here where their eyebrows are. Because my blue is all wet, I'm having to struggle a little bit. And then there's all the kind of like the little fur bits, the fur on the ears. You can bring that out into the blue. The fur around the face, some of the fur around the paws. There's all kinds of places that you can put a little bit of extra fuzz to the fur. Oh, and there's one other little, oh no, we haven't even done the thing. There's several details. Hang on, Caroline, you're getting ahead of yourself here. Several details. There's a little bit of shadow on the white here. And again, that can be ultramarine blue or cobalt blue for the shadow. I'm just going to dilute that ultramarine down and have just a hard edge shadow along here, actually just along there. And then there's a little bit of one here. We can go inside there, and under the cat here, a little bit of shadow on that white there, but you don't want to make it too dark, otherwise it doesn't look like a white edge to it. You have to have it fairly light and leave some white showing. And then the last thing is these runners on the bottom. Is that what they're called, runners? I don't know what they're called, on the bottom of here. And I have to, you have to give me a minute while I dry off the blue for that. So just give me a minute to dry off the blue quick. So I'm going to my good old friend that I love is Ultramarine Blue and Burnt Sienna to make that bronzy color. And I need to wash all that white off my brush quickly. If you use any acrylic, make sure you wash your brush absolutely immediately. Acrylic will set hard on your brush and you won't be able to get it off. So I want a nice dark color. I have some ultramarine blue here and some burnt sienna. And just make a dark brown, bronzy color for the runners on there. You want quite a bit of burnt sienna so that you have a brownish look to it. That'll do. And a small brush again. We want some control. And it's just really straightforward painting of these little they're probably made of wire or something. Sometimes if you want to highlight on them, use your burnt sienna. I may have said raw sienna, but I meant burnt sienna. I can't remember what my brain was thinking just now. So if I want them a little browner where they're highlighted, I'll use more raw sienna. And then when they're in shadow under here, then I'll use one that has a bit more blue in it. That's a little bit darker. So they're really straightforward. Just you paint them with a little brush. Very, very carefully. You can look at, if you've got the photo handy, you can kind of look at it because it can get confusing where all of these bits of wire go and come from. This one sort of, and some go behind another one, so it's better to paint the ones that go in front first and come back and do the ones that go behind them afterwards. Otherwise they're sort of all going to blend into each other, which doesn't matter. It's not, again, this is not the focal point of your painting. I think this one is attached to here, and I've got a little bit of salt there, which is taking my paint and taking it out into the blue. That's just what this salt will do if you leave it there. But this is why you need a tiny brush. You really need to paint it very, very carefully. And see, this one goes behind this one, so I'll come back and do the one in front later after this behind one's dry, and that will just give them a little bit more definition. And they're not complicated at all, just very careful painting. And as you come up behind the cat paw, of course, you've got to go behind his fur. and use the point of your brush. Now we have to do these after the background, because otherwise they would all sort of disappear into the background when you wet them, and they wouldn't look hard edged and defined, because these are made of metal, I think, and they need to have a hard edge, which is a lovely contrast to your cat, which has all those soft edges to it. So you get the idea. You paint all of those, and if you want to have a little bit of highlight on them, you can, after you put them on, you can suck a little bit of paint up on some of the highlighted areas, like there. And I also, when they were dry, I put a little bit of white highlight on them. Already lost my white paint. There it is. So when this was dry, I just added a little bit of, I can even add it now while it's wet. I added a little bit of white highlight to some of the runners, just so that they had a bit of light and shade. And you can see here where there's a bit of salt. It's all kind of sucking my paint up. Oh, I think that is all of the technical information that you need. If you probably need a little bit more time just to finish the details. And let's pull right back here. Place. And then I like to kind of pull my paintbrush towards me to get more white fur on the edge of the cat here and the whiskers. So that's when you can add a bit more of the white in that you may have lost when you did all your shadows. And when you have a painting this small, it's not possible to do this, to leave these white areas as you're painting, and it's not possible to use masking fluid. You can't get the lines small enough. It's just something you have to put on afterwards, and I can make all of the areas around the edge of the cat just a little bit more furry and fuzzy. I can bring that over the red a little bit, make the paws a little bit more fuzzy. So just adding a little bit more fuzz to the edge of the cat with the white paint. And it did this time go over the red okay. The first time I tried it, it didn't, but this time it looks all right. So I think what I did last time, I tried the acrylic gold. I'll show you. Got some acrylic gold here. I think I tried that first, and it just didn't really, the acrylic gold didn't show up very well. And then I sort of had to go over the acrylic gold with acrylic white, because you can't go over the acrylic with watercolor. So I had to go back and see, it doesn't, the acrylic gold doesn't even show up as well as the fine tech watercolor gold. So probably two coats of the fine tech would probably be better than the acrylic even. Just going in for a second coat here. But not everybody has fine tech gold paint. And the fine tech gold paint is about $8 for one little square at the art store, whereas the acrylic is like $1.50 in the dollar store. So it's just a more affordable option, that's all. But it does, I mean, it looks fine. It looks okay. I've got several things going on here now, which doesn't matter because acrylic covers everything. But the thing is, if you put gold acrylic over the white, then it really shows up. It's not quite dry enough yet, but that gives it a nice background. And I think I did 2 coats of the white. It's not dry enough yet. But I think Caroline's right. I quite like the fine tech. And having a bit of shadow behind the letters helps too. And having the black pen surrounding them helps too. And if everything else fails, if you absolutely hate it it doesn't work. You get out one of these and you stick the thing right over the top. Nobody ever even knows what you did underneath there because it's all ready for you. So there we go. Our cat's nearly finished. And I think he's kind of cute. I don't know about you, but I rather enjoyed that little kitten. Turn out. I hope you have a Christmas card that you're proud to send out, or you just enjoyed painting. Anyway, thanks for joining me this week, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.